Hi, I'm Dave Lubach, Managing Editor for the Facilities Market. I recently talked with Nico Viola, the Director of Facilities at Holden Arboretum and Gardens in Cleveland, about his facility's unique setup and the need to have emergency power options should an outage occur. Here's a segment from our chat. When you measure for how much you have to purchase in terms of generators and things like that, Nico, what kind of approach do you take? What kind of how do you determine what you really are looking for in terms of emergency power sources?
It varies, obviously. A good example of that is actually our science center, the Long Science Center. The generator that's in that building was put in when the building was built back in the mid 90s. And at the time, the generator was more than sufficient for the demand of the building. Since then, they've added so much more research equipment to the building that now that generator is very taxed when it does need to kick on because research equipment has dramatically changed in the last 30 years, obviously. So with that building, we're actually in the middle of a study right now because we're working with an electrical engineer and a consultant because we know we have to upgrade the emergency power and the generator in that building. So in a building like that, that's so specialized, we have to just rely on experts and just bring in a consultant or bring in an electrical engineer. In a smaller building, like we have a seed bank, and that's what the seed bank is used for, is we will actually collect seeds from different native plants or maybe plants that are endangered, and they will dry out the plants and dry out the seeds and cryogenically freeze them so they can use them later to reforest or repopulate areas. So that also is crucial. We don't want to lose those freezers, but that was a lot simpler calculation. We were able to do that in-house based on how many freezers were in there, how much power is required, and then very quickly we came to the realization we only needed about an 8,000 watt generator to power that structure. We ran a gas line to that too. It's so far remote on the campus. We had to run it off its own generator because it was not close enough to tie it into one of the bigger ones. But so, it's just a combination, just depending on what you're doing and how big of a project you're working on, essentially.
Of course, everywhere in the country, there's a weather factor. Obviously, in Cleveland, you've got, like you mentioned, extreme cold that can come up, huge snowstorms and things. How are you? I mean, is that just another aspect of things as a manager that you have to really keep an eye on and just be prepared for in case any, like you said, it can be not a life or death situation, but a pretty damaging situation if all of a sudden your systems will go down in one of your one of your areas.
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, being that we're managing a lot of forested land, trees and high winds don't go together too well, as we all know. All of our power lines on our campus are all underground. But about a week before Christmas, we had that big cold front come through, and even though the lines are all underground, the transformers are not. We did have a tree fall, and it hit one of the main transformer, those big green boxes that are always sticking out of the ground. Fell and hit one of those, and it did knock out one of the legs because of three-phase power going into the building. And so we did lose power for about a day. Thankfully, the First Energy was very responsive. They got out here very quickly. They were able to replace the box and everything. But the buildings that were on backup generators, we were fine. The buildings that were not, like the visitor center, didn't have power. So we ended up having to close the public that day because public facing buildings didn't have power.
Sure. Nico, how often do you kind of go through and review like emergency power policies and potential upgrades and things like that? And is that something that you do? What kind of steps do you take for that process?
So because of how large we are, we have our own police department, and our chief of police and facilities have developed what's called the Disaster Emergency Response Plan, called the DERP for short. It's kind of a funny word, but
Sure.
we will about twice a year on average go through that plan to make sure that we're updating any policies or anything that needs to change. That whole emergency response plan during COVID kind of got torn down to its foundations and rebuilt because, just like everyone else I'm sure you've talked to, nobody saw that coming. So we had nothing in our plans as to how to deal with a situation like that. I would say the good thing that came out of the events of 2020 was we came out of things a lot stronger and more organized than we went into it, because it really forced us to really rethink how we did things and really forced us to think about, okay, well, what if the completely unexpected would ever happen? How would we deal with it? Because we were thrust into that.
Mhm.
So I think that was a good exercise for us. Maybe unfortunate that it was real life,
Right.
but yeah. So we will evaluate that, and we obviously, like, just like a lot of other companies, we have an emergency response plan. We have a call list. Certain people are notified of certain things in the event of certain emergencies, and people take responsibilities for their own little sectors of the organization. So thankfully, I don't get too many phone calls in the middle of the night, but
Right.
they still come.